Welcome back to another edition of Christian Apologetics. This is going to be the shortest lecture. I didn't want to add this to the last one because it's too important. It is St. Augustine, considered the greatest philosopher of the 3rd century up until the Middle Ages. So the philosophy of St. Augustine, I would encourage you to go back and look at his writings, his conversion to Christianity, his leadership in the church. So perhaps the greatest and most influential philosopher, as I said, of Roman antiquity up until the Renaissance was Augustine of Hippo. He was born in North Africa of a Christian mother and a pagan father. Okay, so he's from North Africa. He had a Christian mother. He had a non-Christian father. Augustine lived there most of his life. So remember that, North Africa. The last 35 years, he was the Bishop of Carthage. Okay, the Bishop of Carthage. He struggled deeply as a young man with immorality, and he wrote, "I found myself in the midst of a hissing cauldron of lust. I've muddled the stream of friendship with the filth of lewdness." And he eventually dedicated his life to Christ and to celibacy, and he wrote his famous spiritual autobiography, The Confessions. So I would encourage you to read The Confessions. It's a great book. But interestingly enough, Augustine said that one of the worst things that he ever did, right, you'd think it was his promiscuity, but one of the worst things that he ever did is that he and some other friends climbed up into a pear tree. Have you ever had a neighbor who had a tree, a fruit tree, and you and your friends went in and you were hungry for the fruit, so you stole some fruit? There was a man in our neighborhood growing up. He had a cherry tree. He wouldn't eat the cherries; they were just there. So my friends and I sometimes would sneak in there. We'd climb up in the tree. We'd eat these luscious cherries. But Augustine uses this pear illustration to basically say it was really the worst thing that he did, because they went in and instead of eating the pears, essentially what they did is they just, just take a bite, throw it on the ground. He said they were just being mean to be mean. They were just destroying the fruit tree. They didn't eat it because they were hungry. They were just trying to be evil, essentially. So Augustine, really, that incident pointed to his own sin nature. Just evil for the sake of being evil. So Augustine used Plato and other Neoplatonists as a basis for new Christian philosophy. When Plato was consistent with Christian teaching, then Augustine would adopt it. We notice in the Apostle Paul where he says, "Right now in this world we see as through a glass dimly lit," right, like a world of shadows. That is very much influenced by the thinking of Plato. But I believe God gave Plato these true truths, as Francis A. Schaeffer used to say, and even non-believers could pick them up along the way. It wasn't like they didn't have access to truth. They had access to the universe, just like we do as God's people, as Christians. So again, when Plato was consistent with Christian teaching, Augustine adopted it. For instance, Plato believed that abstract ideas were more important than the tangible world. Plato believed that abstract ideas were more important than the tangible world. Plato also believed that we can acquire true knowledge not by observing things and events, the scientific method, but by reflecting on the fundamental ideas that lie behind the physical universe. Okay, so Plato wanted to focus not just on observing things and events, but by reflecting on the fundamental facts and ideas that lie behind the physical universe. Christian Platonists saw God as the center of reality. Christian Platonists saw God at the center of all of reality. And so we find that in the very beginning of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Why is there something instead of nothing? Because in the beginning, a long, long time ago, God created the heavens and the earth. In Colossians 1:16, we see that Jesus is the image of the invisible God. That means when you see Jesus, you've seen God, and that He is the creator and the sustainer of all things. All power, all dominion, and all authority belong to Him, and it is all being upheld by Christ, and it is for His glory. So why is there something instead of nothing? Because God created and God sustains, and God has purposeful purposes for His universe and His people. So Augustine used Plato and other Neoplatonists as a basis for this new philosophy, this new Christian philosophy, as I said. When Plato was consistent with Christian teaching, then Augustine adopted it because it fit with Scripture. Again, Plato believed that abstract ideas were more important than the tangible world, primarily because he wanted to get to the fundamental basis behind the universe, right? So Plato believed that we can acquire true knowledge not by observing things and events, but by reflecting on the fundamental ideas that lie behind the physical universe. Christian Platonists, again, saw God at the center of reality. Okay, so in addition to his Confessions, and I have this book, Augustine also wrote The City of God. Now, City of God is about that thick, so it will require quite a bit of time, or you could just get the Cliff Notes on the book. But The City of God is a comprehensive philosophy of history by Augustine. In it, he rejected the pagan Greco-Roman view that history repeats itself in endless, meaningless cycles. Augustine viewed history as a purposeful process where the human and the divine interact from the creation to Christ's incarnation and the end of the world. Okay, so I'll say that again. He wrote the Confessions about his sort of morbid, lustful life prior to coming to Christ. He speaks about the pear illustration to illustrate that he knew that he had a sinful nature because he and his friends just did this evil act just to be evil. They didn't do it. They didn't steal because they were hungry. They just did it because they have a rotten core themselves that we all need fixing. And only Jesus Christ can fix our sin problem, our death problem, and our hell problem, as I've said in another lecture. So Augustine wrote an additional work, The City of God, again, which is a comprehensive, remember, philosophy of history. In it, Augustine takes aim at pagan Greco-Roman culture and the Greco-Roman worldview that believed that history is just repeating itself in endless and meaningless cycles. So we might see that history does repeat itself in cycles, but we would not say they are endless, meaningless cycles, because God ultimately has a purpose and a plan for human history, even for the evil that is done and the evil empires in the world. They all play a role, not that God causes evil, but they all play a role in working out the order of history, ultimately leading to the glory of God. So Augustine viewed history as a purposeful process where the human and the divine interact from the creation of Christ's incarnation and the end of the world. There were countless thinkers during this time who saw history through the lens of economics and politics. Okay, so again, there were endless people, thinkers during this time, who saw history only through the lens of economic policy and politics. Augustine interpreted history in moral terms. Okay, so he believed that God was not necessarily interested in the fate of kingdoms and empires, except as they affected the spiritual destiny of people. Okay, again, Augustine believed that God was not necessarily interested in the fate of kingdoms and empires, except as they affected the spiritual destiny of people. So we're not saying that God was not concerned with human welfare, but I think what Augustine is getting at is that ultimately God is about bringing glory through his people who live in many different cultures, right? Some have been raised in free market economies like the West, particularly the way America used to be. Some have been raised in Eastern Bloc countries prior to the fall of the Berlin Wall, which would have been communist. Some were raised in Eastern cultures, Muslim cultures. Some were raised in South America, in Hispanic culture. So Christians have been born and raised in very different cultural, political, and economic cultures and contexts. So Augustine is trying to say that ultimately God is looking at the spiritual destiny of people. And God certainly has given us, as humans, this creative ability. That's why you have the wonders of German culture and of French culture and of Asian culture and the cuisine and all of the different ways that the buildings and the architecture and all of that, that all comes out of the creative power of God. The ability to reason, all of these things come from God. So Augustine's not saying that that's not important, but what he's saying is that he believed that God was not necessarily interested in the fate of kingdoms, because some of these kingdoms, they rise and fall, except as they affected the spiritual destiny of the people. So true history for Augustine had less to do with struggles between states and empires and everything to do with the ultimate struggle between good and evil. Augustine placed humanity in two categories, two opposing groups: those who know God and those who do not. Right? Those who know God and those who do not. Those who have received his forgiveness and grace and those who have not. There are those who dwell in the city of God and those who dwell in the earthly city. These two cities are hopelessly intertwined in this life, just like the wheat and the tares that grow up together, as recorded in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 13. The members of these two cities will be separated in the afterlife, one to eternal life and one to eternal destruction. And Augustine's idea of two cities would impact culture for the next 1,000 years. So I would encourage you to read the works of St. Augustine. St. Augustine also was trying to bring the church to the place of understanding the Apostle Paul's view of salvation, for by grace you've been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not as a result of works, so that no one should boast. And so Augustine believed that salvation was the gift of God by faith. He did not believe that you needed to add works to salvation to be saved. Now, he was not saying that true faith will not produce good works. It will. But we are not saved because of our works. And Augustine truly wanted to make that point very clear. And so he really echoed the Apostle Paul. So there are many things that we can thank God for in the life, the work, the writings, his position as Bishop of Carthage, and for the Augustinian history and Augustinian tradition of faith. So I'll end there. We will pick up next time with life in a pre-modern world, Greco-Roman spirituality. Okay, so we've looked at Greco-Roman, a little bit about their culture. We looked a little bit Greco-Roman philosophy. And so in this next lecture, we will look at life in a pre-modern world, Greco-Roman spirituality. And I think we're going to find that spirituality in the Greco-Roman world was much like now in a postmodern era, that people will say, oh, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. And that really, we're going to hear a lot of that, I think, in the pre-modern era. Okay, until next time, thanks for joining me. God bless you, and we'll see you next time.